Welcome, everyone. This is our next theme, our next cycle of learning, and we will be focusing on themes in art for this learning cycle. And the themes in art are the storyline or the ideas represented in a work of art. And this work of art, Giotto's Lamentation from the Arena Chapel, 1305, contains all the themes that we will be looking at today. So at the end of this PowerPoint, you may want to turn back to this original slide and ask yourself, how do the themes impact the work? Because they're all there. Now remember, again, we could be looking at this work and evaluating it from a historical perspective. We could also be looking at it and evaluating it from a formal perspective, which again is looking at the elements and principles such as color, line, shape, etc. But today we're going to focus on the themes. The first theme that we will look at is the theme of nature. And what I like to think about is how the world began with nature. So this is something that was here before we were here. So the natural world, that is the theme that covers plants, animals, the earth, the sky, the cosmos, anything in nature that exists independent of the human species. Now, of course, the human species is a part of nature, but because art making is so tied to the human experience, we have a separate theme for human beings. So the theme of nature describes everything else that's a part of nature. So, for example, with these images, you see trees, you see the sky, you see rocks and mountains. You see horses from the Paleolithic age. All of these things reference nature. That is what I call the first great theme. And here it is. Here's the second great theme that is encompassed in art, and that is the theme of the body. And so this theme looks at how the body functions or performs, the state or quality of being human, similarities and differences found within a group of persons, and what is universal and what is unique to the human experience. So all the images you see below talk about how we are either the same, how our body is put together, or what makes us unique or different. And so this theme, the body, covers the human person in any work of art. The next great theme is called the daily life, and I like to look at this theme as nature and the human body and how those two themes interact. Think for example of a house that's being built in the Arctic. You could build a house of ice in the Arctic. You couldn't build a house made out of ice in the tropics. So this theme of daily life is about our species, the human species, engaging nature, using what we have around us to improve our existence. So daily life is everyday routines, individually or as a group, tools, instruments, shelter, anything made by humanity to improve or secure continued existence. So for example, in the upper right, you see a salt cellar from Sierra Leone, Africa, and this was a vessel to hold salt. And salt was a very important mineral for this social group. And so this society would create very elaborate and beautiful vessels to kind of underscore just how important salt was to their culture. On the left, with the painting The Harvesters, you see multiple activities going on, from working in the field to stopping to eat lunch, harvesting the crops. And so this is meant as kind of a description of how they did their work and how their culture engaged nature. And then in the lower right hand corner, you see from Paul Cézanne, the card players. And this again just shows a group of persons engaged in a leisure activity. And so when you're looking at the daily life, you want to think about, what are they wearing? Where are they sitting? What type of game are they playing? If you notice the little pipes in the upper right hand corner, you know that smoking a pipe was probably another leisure activity for this culture. And so when you're thinking about the daily life, you want to think about how our species, the human species, engages nature to create routines or shelters or tools or instruments, anything that would be used to improve our existence on Earth. The next great theme that we will look at is politics and protest. And remember, with your reflections, you'll be reading certain chapters from your text that will reflect different aspects of these great themes. So with politics and protest, we're looking at position and rank within a social structure, the powerful versus the powerless, and reactions to or against these structures. So we have two great Spanish artists, Francisco de Goya and Pablo Picasso, who create two images of war, the 3rd of May 1808 and Guernica of 1937. And in both cases, the artist is focusing on the abuse of power and the plight of the powerless. And so these can be political, these can be cultures against cultures, these can be individual social group against another social group, and it can also be person to person. Politics doesn't just necessarily refer to governments or institutions, but it talks more just about the human relationship. So for example, if you look down in your lower left-hand corner, you see a painting by Mary Cassatt called The Nurse and the Child, and you want to think about who has the power here. The nurse is the employee, and so you have to think at some point that the child, even though they're dependent upon the nurse, has a certain amount of power. And that power certainly can change as the relationship develops. So political relationships could be between two spouses, or a parent and a child, or an employer and employee. These are all political relationships that suggest levels of power, whether they're flexible or rigid, and this is what politics and protest is all about as a theme. The next great theme that we look at is the theme of spirituality. And spirituality is that moment when any person or group of persons, social group or culture or society, stops and thinks about these bigger questions beyond just survival. They're not asking, how do we survive? That's a really basic question that's covered in the daily life and politics and protest. Now these are bigger questions that talk about things like, where did we come from? Who made us? What is our purpose here on earth? What happens after we die? These great questions that talks about larger things develop into religions and deities, and are often expressed in sacred spaces and spiritual beliefs and practices and rituals. And so we see two metal sculptures from two different cultures that reflect on the notion of deity. History and storytelling, our next theme, reflects on the notion that we understand that our time on earth is limited, that just as there was a moment when we weren't here, there will be a moment again when we won't be here. So our time is limited. We know that at some point we will die, and that kind of instills in us this desire to be remembered, to not be forgotten. So history and storytelling is very much connected to time and on this idea of not forgetting. So history and storytelling as a theme are stories related to a person or a group of persons, and includes an awareness of time and mortality. And so these images and objects that you see, from Jared Kalt's Raft of Medusa to Betty Saar's The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, The Pyramid of Dozier, and Sandra Botticelli's Birth of Venus, all talk about a person or a group of persons who want something to be remembered. It can be in an individual political event, such as the Raft of Medusa. It can be how a group of persons were treated in a culture, such as the liberation of Aunt Jemima. It can be the remembrance of a great leader, such as the Pyramid of Dozier, which was built by Imhotep. And it can also be a visual understanding of those greater questions, those spiritual questions we ask, such as Botticelli's Birth of Venus. In each case, we are being asked to remember a story or an experience, whether actual, literal, or metaphorical, that a group of persons or a person wants us to remember. They don't want us to forget this. And so that's what the theme of history and storytelling is about. It's about remembering. Our last great theme is visual experience. And in many ways, this is the most important theme of all. This is actually the theme that is always present in a work of art. So, for example, you may have an image or an object that doesn't have anything spiritual going on, or doesn't have anything political going on, but it will always be providing, in some form or fashion, a visual experience. So this is the one theme that's always present. And in many ways, it is what I tell my studio students is the most important theme. Think about this idea that you may have the most important message to come across, that you want to come across with your painting, but if you don't paint a visually interesting painting, no one will look at it. So again, visual experience as a theme is visual sensation for interest, information, or pleasure, and can include the element of fantasy. So we see with Matisse's cutouts these great abstracted image that shows wonderful color and natural forms that we can visually respond to. In the upper left-hand corner, we see Arrest Number 1, 1965, from Bridget Riley, which is just a black and white exploration of the element of line and that sensation or rhythm that's created through these successively curving lines. And so it's not meant in this image to tell a story or to relay an idea. It's just there to create a visual sensation. And then in the center we see a fantasy image, a unicorn, which is a fantastic creature that to date we don't know ever existed, but represents some spiritual ideas for many cultures. And so this also allows us to imagine things. Visual experience as a theme allows us to imagine things that we don't know are there, but somehow we think are still important. So this again is what I consider the most important theme because it's the essence of art. It is something that we can visually perceive or hold in our hands. And so these are the 7 basic themes that you will be looking at when you are reading your text and watching the videos related to this cycle of learning, which includes the reflections. Thank you.